Well, good evening, everyone. I'd like to call to order the meeting of the City of Sandy Planning Commission for Monday, November 28, 2022 at 6:30 p.m. This meeting is being held in hybrid in-person online format via Zoom and live here in council chambers. So we will kick it off with a roll call.
Okay, Commissioner Wegener,
Here.
Commissioner Pullen,
Here.
Commissioner Lee,
Here.
Commissioner McLean-Wenzel,
Here.
Commissioner Mayton,
Here.
Commissioner Hook, and Chair Crosby.
Here. We have a quorum. We had in our packets the minutes, draft minutes for September 26, 2022. Our last meeting. Any changes, additions?
Look good to me.
Okay. Not seeing any changes to be made. We will deem them as approved as distributed. This is a time in each of our meetings where we give opportunity for just general public comment for anybody who has comment or question or something they want to speak to the Planning Commission on this evening that pertains to a matter that is not on the agenda. And if you are watching, listening via Zoom, if you click the raise hand button, wait to be recognized. If you're on the telephone, it's *9 to effectively raise your hand and wait to be recognized. So do we have any general comments to the Planning Commission tonight?
After I was going to do it after.
You can do it after it is.
I do not see anybody with their hands raised.
Okay. We'll move on to the director's report. Kelly's report was in our packet. Anybody have any questions, or did it raise questions? Or
Yeah, I did want to say just a couple things. I wanted to congratulate Commissioner Mayton on his successful bid to become our next city councilor. So I believe this will be likely our last meeting with him as a commissioner, but we'll see him around quite a bit. So I don't have anything scheduled for December, which is great. And then January, we do have a quasi judicial land use hearing for Johnson RV off of 362nd and Industrial Way. And then we will have a few more quasi judicial hearings coming up in the winter or early spring. We have two pretty large apartment complexes that were submitted prior to the moratorium going into effect. One's called Cascade Creek Apartments and the other one's State Street Homes. And then Shelley's also working on the Barlow Trail Veterinary Clinic on the south side of Pioneer, although it will likely not be reviewed by the Planning Commission as they're trying to meet all the code provisions. Just a few other little brief things I wanted to update everybody on. We are keeping track of the ERU allowances with the moratorium. So far, since October 3rd, we've issued 18 single-family homes. So that's 18 of the 120 ERUs. We are hopeful, though, that with all of the additional work that the city's been doing to the treatment plant and to the existing sewer treatment system to kind of tighten it up and have less rainwater intrusion into the system, that we're hopeful that that will allow for more ERUs in the coming months once the stress test is performed in late winter, early spring. So not only hopeful, but we're cautiously optimistic that it will result in more ERUs and hopefully lifting the moratorium. And then the only other thing in addition to what I had in the report was I didn't really want to put it in here just because I didn't know what the decision was going to be, and I didn't want to like make it too long. But the council last Monday night did hear the Bull Run Terrace reconsideration. They voted 6-1 to approve it. And it's going to a second reading and final approval on, what is that, December 5th, I believe. So the staff recommendation was to approve it with probably about 8 or 9 pages of conditions. The city council went with the staff recommendation of all the conditions added to it. And I really do believe, and I told the council this, I really do believe that we're at a really good place with it. And I'm really happy that the council went ahead and approved it, because I think it's going to accomplish some major goals for the city, such as expanding the park, putting DeBarco Road in, getting some new utility lines put through there. And then also getting some money for 360, or I'm sorry, for DeBarco Road and Highway 211. We also are going to get about $270,000 to that intersection improvement. So that was an additional consideration that I worked with our new transportation engineer to get in there. So very helpful for that going forward. And hopefully finally on, I think this is like the 4th or 5th subdivision iteration since I've worked here on that site. I'm hopeful that it goes forward this time. So that's all I had.
Okay.
Chair, I saw Jim with a question.
Yes.
Or Commissioner Lee, sir.
Yes, will that be a report that will be available soon?
Yeah, I could send you the link to the staff report. So the staff report and the ordinance are on our website currently. That is what they approved. Since there was no changes made by the city council, the staff report in this case, which is not normal, but in this case will act as the final decision and is also attached to the ordinance and will be adopted as part of the ordinance. So I can forward that to you tomorrow, but it is on the website.
I'll get it from the website. Thank you.
Kelly, I have one question.
Yeah.
After attending city council meetings the last couple of months and listening to that specific testimony, one thought that came up in my mind, especially for the person that voted against it, I was thinking about how much space is vacant on our zoning map in each section. And I thought we had done this work. Maybe Shelley had done it for us before, and I didn't know if you had that. And if we do, I was asking, could I get a copy of it? If we don't, is that something that we can do, is to look at our different zones, how much of it is in use, how much it is vacant? Because the one city council that voted against it was arguing the fact that we were converting the land, over to C1 or whatever it was. And it made me think, how much space is actually available within our UGB? And
Yeah,
I don't know if you had that data.
I mean, we could give you some really preliminary data, but I would rather wait, because the city council spent, I think, almost $80,000 between the economic opportunities analysis and the housing needs analysis that are both currently being done by Eco Northwest as part of the comp plan. And so that's all being worked on right now. What I can tell you is that it's going to show you on the economic side of things that we're gonna, in 20 years, they project we'll have a slight surplus of commercial land and a slight deficit of industrial land. They haven't gotten far enough yet on the housing stuff to give updates on that, but as soon as they do, we'll certainly forward it all over to you.
That's what I was more interested in, is about housing,
Yeah.
especially with House Bill, making the duplexes. How much land is actually available for housing today?
Yeah, I think any numbers we give you honestly would be outdated like within a couple months, because that's what they're working on right now.
Okay, all right.
So, but yeah, once I have all the final numbers, I'll definitely be forwarding it to the city council and planning commission.
Thank you, sir.
I would like to, no, I wouldn't like to, I'm going to, with some sadness and a tremendous amount of regret, let my fellow planning commissioners know that I told Kelly earlier today and Chairman Crosby, I'm tendering my resignation from the planning commission effective, well, this will be my last meeting. It's personal reasons, but I know you're going to wonder what those are. So I'll just say that any of those of you who've cared for elderly parents that are not doing well at all, it's very demanding. And I just can't give the planning commission the energy and the time that it needs. So I really feel good about the work I've done. I think I've been here 5 years. I know I had another year ahead of me, so I realize you're losing me and you're losing Chris at the same time. So I really apologize for the impact it's going to have on you. But And I've really enjoyed being part of this. So this will be my last meeting.
You will be missed. It's shocking. I understand.
Any other comments? Nobody else is leaving, are they?
I'm not leaving, but I do want to just congratulate Councilor-elect Mayton on his win for City Council, and also note that in addition to Commissioner McLean-Winslow, you will both be very missed. And I've enjoyed the short amount of time that I've worked with both of you, and I'm only sad that we only got back in person for a few meetings to kind of really start to get to really know you. And so you'll both be missed. On a completely separate note, I will unfortunately be missing our January meeting. I believe I will be out of the country.
So that gets us to our next.
Yes,
Very good segue,
Yeah.
Commissioner Wagner.
because we do need to take a poll to see who knows that they will be at the January meeting now. I mean, barring illness, and other emergencies, but who we got left? We got
3,
Commissioner Pullen
for that
and
meeting.
Commissioner Lee and myself.
And I don't know
Who-
Commissioner Hook not being here. I'm not sure.
Yeah, he's
Oh,
not.
that's right. So you got 3.
So how about Commissioner Pullen and Lee? What's your calendars look like?
I will be there.
I will be here.
Okay.
Would that give us enough people though for a quorum?
With
Well-
2 vacant seats, doesn't the quorum go down?
I don't know. That's
Right, we had that discussion.
our city attorney's on the line.
My
so-
seat will be vacant. If she's leaving, her seat will be vacant. So then instead of having 6 of us, you'll have
4,
4. A quorum would only be 3.
3. Right, because your seat would not be vacant because you're just not there.
Not the
It's just,
Right.
It's vacant.
you're no longer, there is not a
Oh,
commission.
that's true.
We went through those things in our bylaws, and I can't remember where we landed, but
I thought it was
we'll
the
get it
first
figured out
census.
by January. We know at least 3 of us right now.
Yeah,
Potentially,
The one thing is that Shelley will have to start doing the notices and legals and everything within the next few weeks. So, Josh, are you on the line right now?
I'm here, but we'll have to check the bylaws to get a definitive answer to that question.
I can pull them up real fast. I mean,
I don't have those.
they're on
Okay.
the site. Our bylaws are in Title 2 of the municipal code.
Oh, you don't have separate bylaws from the code?
David Doofman recommended not adopting separate ones. He just wanted us to just have the ones in the code.
Okay.
And we just updated them. What was that in the last year, right?
Right, the ink is still wet.
We can go back and change them. It's section 2.16 of Title 2.
I'll take a look and we can circle back to that. How about that?
And then the only reason why I want to come to a resolution tonight, because if we need to move it, we would probably need to do so tonight to another date,
Right, for your,
so that Shelley can know when
yeah.
to change everything to.
Okay. I will take a look and circle back with you so we can get that resolved tonight.
Okay, thank you.
Well, we're all moving up fast in seniority.
Well, I'll just take 30 seconds. I wasn't prepared to do it because I thought I had one more meeting to go to, but I'm really disappointed. This is my last planning commission meeting, but it's been a great pleasure serving on this committee with a couple different folks. I know we got some new folks this time around, but it's been really educational to me. And for those who know me, I work for the state too. So I thought I knew something, but I didn't know anything until I got here. And Jerry and Hollis, you two have been a tremendous help to me. And I appreciate that. And I look forward to serving on city council. And just so you know, I did ask the mayor that if I could be back on this committee as the representative for city council, but he hasn't decided that yet. So I don't know if that will happen or not. I might be on the Arts Commission or something. Who knows? But thank you for supporting me, and I appreciate the work you do.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you both. We will continue our role as being the trainers for council members. Okay, any other comments from anybody before we move into a work session? Okay. I'm gonna toss it over. Is it Shelley?
Yeah.
You got it. You got the floor. Get us going on cul-de-sacs.
Yep. Okay, let me share this. So we're talking about our code requirements regarding standards for cul-de-sacs. This is the most exciting topic we could possibly be talking about. No, it actually is pretty interesting. Street connectivity, the history of American suburbs. A lot of this stuff has some really interesting implications that we can talk about and figure out how we want to approach this and how we want to codify it in our municipal code in a clear and objective way. So just a kind of a quick overview of how this is going to go. First, I'm going to talk about what clear and objective means. Second, general best practices for cul-de-sacs as determined by the American Planning Association and other organizations that do this kind of work. We'll talk about what our current code language is. Next, a review of what other cities have done with their codes. And then finally, open it up for discussion. So in the Oregon revised statutes, it says local government may adopt and apply only clear and objective standards, conditions, and procedures regulating the development of housing. You're probably familiar with this. This is a really big thing that a lot of jurisdictions in Oregon are needing to grapple with in figuring out how to take the values, the priorities, the goals of what their communities want to see in their city and codify that in a clear and objective way. So clear and objective requirements, it's a little frustrating because the very concept of something being clear and objective is itself subjective, but there are some kind of benchmarks that if we're able to show that our standards meet these kind of qualifications, these characteristics, that we can be pretty sure that they'll hold up as clear and objective. So the first is that everything has clear definitions. The second is that we use quantitative standards as opposed to qualitative or subjective standards. And third, that they're backed by measurement techniques that are commonly used in industry, that are backed by common sense, that basically have some kind of grounding in, we made this decision because of this kind of measurement technique. So cul-de-sac best practices as determined by kind of industry organizations boils down to avoid them when possible. They hinder a lot of efforts towards network connectivity, which means that you get more vehicles per mile traveled, miles per vehicle traveled. You get increased traffic speed. Research has actually shown that people drive faster on dead-end streets than through streets. They're often difficult for emergency vehicles to maneuver, especially when they're very long, when it's a very long stretch of a dead-end street with a cul-de-sac. They can have difficult snow maintenance if the diameter of the cul-de-sac isn't big enough, because what happens is all of the snow gets piled up in the middle, which makes it difficult to maneuver around. And they also kind of create physical isolation. The attachments that I put with the staff report, if you had a chance to look at those, two of the attachments are a couple of articles, one from the American Planning Association, looking at what in 2007 were considered best practices for cul-de-sac design. And then also an article that was based off of an academic paper. This article was published in Access Magazine. It's a little older. I don't remember the year on this, but 2004. That kind of gives a really good overview of the history of cul-de-sacs, why they started becoming popular in American suburban design, and some of the disadvantages as well as advantages of cul-de-sac design. So if you're able to take a look at those, that provides a lot of good context. However, there are situations in which it makes sense to use cul-de-sacs. When you're dealing with topographic limitations like slopes or wetlands, cul-de-sacs make sense. And also when you don't want to connect a local street to something like an arterial, right? So if we had a local street that is abutting Highway 26, we don't necessarily want the local street to intersect with Highway 26. So there are certain situations in which it does make sense to use a cul-de-sac. The general consensus is these are special cases, and a developer needs to show that given these kinds of limitations, a cul-de-sac makes sense. So the burden of proof is on the developer to show we need a cul-de-sac in this instance, as opposed to making it very easy or incentivizing cul-de-sac development. So this is from that American Planning Association article. I did quite a bit of research to try to find why these numbers were chosen. There's one thought with, especially with this length, that it has to do with how long fire hoses are. I don't know when that sort of became a reason for limiting the length of cul-de-sac streets, and if fire hoses are now longer than they were at that point in time, because typically you put fire hydrants at intersections and not on dead ends. But I wasn't able to find anything to verify the truth of that claim. There is kind of a psychological urban form concern with dead-end streets that are too long. You get kind of like the Stepford Wives effect. If you're looking down a dead-end street and all of these houses that look the same with the same exact setbacks, just is a little eerie, like not very comfortable. So that's an argument for decreasing the length. But based on the research that the American Planning Association did of how cities around the country were creating standards, this is the range that they found, the 250 feet to 500 feet. Diameter, you really want to base your diameter on how much room a fire truck needs to turn around in a cul-de-sac. And so that's 90 to 120 feet. Grade is 5% maximum, which might actually be a little low. And I wasn't able to find why 5% was chosen as the maximum. But I did find other examples of cities that had, Seattle has an 8% maximum. Of course, it's Seattle, which has tons of hills. And so there might be this assumption that people are used to driving on steep slopes and stopping at intersections on a slope. And then trips per day, they recommend a cap of 250. So that's assuming 10 trips per dwelling unit, so a total of 25 dwelling units served by cul-de-sac. They also require some, or they recommend some design requirements like stormwater management. You have a lot of risk of stormwater pooling in a cul-de-sac, requiring bike and pedestrian access, so that if somebody's walking down a dead-end street, they're able to walk to another street instead of having to turn around, go around. And then also encouraging cluster development, which cluster development is a kind of a design approach that prioritizes small lot development in order to save open space. That would require changing some other development code points. So that would be kind of a complicated conversation, but these are the best practices as recommended by the American Planning Association based on their research of other cities around the country. So our current code language, right now, we just have an outright prohibition on cul-de-sacs. We did this as kind of a stopgap because a lot of our code requirements for cul-de-sacs were not clear or objective. And so we expeditiously decided to introduce a provision in our land division chapter in 17-100, just outright prohibiting cul-de-sacs. But we do still have the cul-de-sac language in our code. This one from 1784, we have a maximum length of 400 feet, and it shouldn't serve more than 20 dwelling units. So that's within that range. And those are quantitative requirements, which meet the standard for clear and objective. Unless a proposal is successfully processed through the adjustments and variances chapter of the code. This second part opens up to some subjectivity. Cul-de-sacs longer than 400 feet or developments with only one access point may be required to provide an alternative access for emergency vehicle use only, install fire prevention sprinklers, or provide other mitigating measures determined by the city. So that may, with only one access point may be required. That's not legally enforceable. And so it kind of raises the question of, okay, then what do we want to do about these situations where there might only be one access point, or where we need more access for emergency vehicles? How do we codify that in a clear and objective way? In chapter 1798, the parking, loading, and access requirements, I read this as very clear and objective. So this is about driveway approaches within the bulb of the cul-de-sac, so the actual round part of the cul-de-sac. So driveways can't make up more than 50% of the circumference of the bulb. And then it goes on to explain how their circumference is measured. So we're talking about very specific measurement techniques. We're talking about very specific quantitative standards. And we even have this little diagram in the code that took me a while to understand what I was trying to say. But that is pretty clear and objective, talking about driveway width on the cul-de-sac bulb. In 17-100, we talk about in any block in a residential district over 600 feet, we do require pedestrian or bicycle access to other streets through the middle of the block. It also says to enhance public convenience and mobility, such access ways are required to connect to cul-de-sacs or between streets and other public or semi-public lands. And so we do have this requirement for pedestrian access between cul-de-sacs and other streets. So one of the things we did in researching code requirements for cul-de-sacs, things that we could potentially adopt, was look at 12 other cities in Oregon and Washington to determine what are other cities looking at, what are they doing. And what's interesting is there's a pretty wide range of code requirements. Some of these cities get very specific, and some of the cities like Beaverton barely have any design standards or code requirements at all. Attachment 1 in the staff report is a table outlining specific points for each of these cities. So some of the common elements we found are this concept again of only allowing cul-de-sacs when topographic access or site layout conditions necessitate. Almost all of them talk about a maximum length. Almost all of them talk about a maximum number of dwelling units. Many of them have that pedestrian access requirement. And then a number of them go into design themes, which that's where you start getting really subjective. When you start talking about things like, we want a little, little landscaped round median in the middle of a cul-de-sac. That's when you start getting not as clear and objective. I don't think that means that we can or that we should not explore any kind of requirements like that, because those kinds of things are really good for stormwater. They're really good for community character. They're really good for urban form. But we do need to be careful that if we want to have kind of some of these design requirements, some of these urban form requirements, that we're doing them in a clear and objective way. So just kind of going through a couple of these themes, you'll notice there's this range on maximum length between 200 and 400 feet. And some of the cities don't have a maximum length requirement at all. About half of the cities have a maximum number of dwelling units. I thought it was really interesting that Happy Valley has 10. I would imagine Happy Valley would be a little more amenable to having more dwelling units, more homes around a cul-de-sac, but that's interesting. But it tops out at 25. And then almost all of them require pedestrian access. That's typically a universally accepted best practice. So some of the discussion points that we want to talk about, we want to talk about some of these quantitative measures like maximum length, dwelling unit service, and then also talk about pedestrian access and maybe get into some of those design requirements, potentially looking at what other cities have done. But then also thinking about maybe we don't have all of the information that we need to have in order to determine, okay, should it be 300 feet or should it be 400 feet? What would make us decide we want 400 feet instead of 300 feet? And so I want to have a conversation about what kinds of questions should we be asking and where should we be looking for answers to those questions. Because I think that conversation might be a little more productive than, debating whether or not a cul-de-sac should serve 20 dwelling units or 25 dwelling units. Although we can totally have that conversation too.
Yeah, just are you done with this?
Yeah.
Just one other little thing to add. I think Shelley did a really good job going through everything. We had the requirements in the code that Shelley said that we struck. And then Emily and I worked on the parking code section and I believe another code section and made those revisions to be clear and objective, or what we thought were clear and objective. We kept getting arguments from land use attorneys, really, that mainly Schwabe, Williamson, and Wyatt, that the code was not clear and objective, and that the governing principles or requirements around cul-de-sacs were not clear and objective enough, so that they were basically trying to argue their way out of all the requirements. So we said, okay, fine, we'll just take them out of the code altogether. So in 17100, it now just says they're prohibited. We left the other standards in there because if you do go through a variance procedure, you could still get a cul-de-sac. And then we wanted something in the code that would kind of still govern us and give us some, give staff something to kind of base their decisions off of if they're meeting it or not. But as Shelley said, if we're trying to make the entire thing clear and objective and move back in that direction, which is our hope, we'll probably have to revisit those other sections to tidy them up a little bit. But that's why it went down like it did. As you'll probably remember, we also added a bunch of additional criterion to the subdivision and partition approval requirements. And that was for the same exact reason, is because they kept saying stuff like, oh, we don't know what the official street plan of the city is. Okay, fine. We'll add in that it's the 2011 transportation system plan and reference all the figures as well. So there's kind of no end to this kind of argument, unfortunately. But that's why we struck them temporarily in the code, because we're getting legal challenges about it.
Mhm.
Well, thank you.
Mhm.
Excellent work. And I will say those two articles I found fascinating.
Yeah.
and the kind of the introduction of the sociological factors
Mhm.
was very interesting. And the thing that I learned that I never thought of, because at least in my memory, which, you know, is maybe not that great, is that the cul-de-sacs that we've had come before us have been here and there. And sometimes they're just one cul-de-sac of a development, you know. And in reading the articles, it was the first time I read, at least as I understood them, that there are some communities that are like a bunch of cul-de-sacs.
Mhm.
And I had never even thought of that because they just seem to be the one-off for us in Sandy so far. And some of the sociological things I would even question. The idea of the isolation, to me, is not necessarily bad. If you're in a city of 10,000 people,
Mhm.
I will say from our personal experience, if you know where we live, when we moved there 32 years ago, DeBarco ended about 4 houses down from us. So we were essentially on a dead end street. It wasn't planned that way, you know, it eventually broke through. That was our kids' playground. What they talked about kids playing safely in the street, we lived it. And we knew all the neighbors. And now that the DeBarco has gone through, oh, and the other thing I thought of was reading is, and when a car went by on our road, we knew if they were a neighbor. You knew like that. And now cars going by all the time, I haven't a clue who they are. And to my chagrin, I don't know my neighbors the way, because they've moved on and new ones. So some of those things, just, it's been very intriguing to me to read about.
Yeah, it's it's about weighing the advantages and the disadvantages, right? And then also allowing it to open a bigger conversation of, okay, the stuff that we like about cul-de-sacs, how can we encourage that using other methods? If we do decide we want to err on the side of restrictive with cul-de-sacs, how can we, what are other areas in which we can encourage community and getting to know your neighbors and safety? Yeah, so it's one of those things where you can't just stop with one conversation, you know, where it's like it just kind of opens up all of these other questions of, you know, okay, if we make these changes, what are going to be all of the externalities of these changes, and how can we predict them and plan for them?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Commissioner Lee.
Yes, and I want to agree with you, Chair Crosby. I live on a dead-end street on Ichabod, and I find that we have a lot of safety as a result. We don't have people stealing packages off our porch, and we have kids playing in our streets, and there's really an advantage.
One thing I wrote down that may be helpful to us going forward is the intent of the city, and there may be a fine line differentiating between these two words, to encourage cul-de-sacs or to allow
Mhm.
cul-de-sacs. And that may, if we knew what our posture was, may help us down the road make some of these decisions, whether we're encouraging it or just allowing it.
Mhm, mhm. I guess it would depend on what your priorities are. The general consensus is that the sort of 20th century way of designing residential suburban areas is generally an inefficient use of land, and it limits by limiting street connectivity. You can do all the math like VMT, vehicle miles traveled, but basically there's more vehicle use with dead-end streets. At the same time, like you said, and then also in this the reconsidering the cul-de-sac article, there are certainly advantages to dead-end streets. So it kind of the standard that a lot of places tend to use is more on the allow rather than the encourage. We'll also pairing that with, okay, the stuff that we like about cul-de-sacs, how can we encourage that in other ways?
What's it called? Because we've had some developments where you have a street and you just basically put a bulb out. So it's like the
Oh, yeah.
top end. And
A
we've
knuckle.
called those, people will say, I live in a cul-de-sac
Mhm.
when they refer to that, but it's not a dead end street. Is there another name?
It's
Yeah.
a knuckle.
A knuckle.
Yeah,
I live on a knuckle.
Yeah.
Okay.
and then you get into all of these other things like hammerheads and eyebrows, and there's just a lot of names for what's basically a dead end street. Yeah,
Mhm.
yeah.
Oh, yeah. Go ahead.
I would just encourage you guys to, if you decide to allow cul-de-sacs, that you guys really push for or mandate good bicycle and pedestrian connectivity, because I think that's where they can really hurt the community
Mhm.
if you lose that.
Mhm.
So that's my 2 cents.
Commissioner Wagner.
Thank you, Chair. And Shelley, first of all, thank you for putting those articles into the report. It helped out a ton. And this was actually a question I think I asked Shelley shortly after joining the commission as to why they weren't in use. So I really enjoyed the topic. Like the chair and Commissioner Lee, I grew up on cul-de-sacs and a couple different kinds in a couple different neighborhoods, and really felt that sense of community. I think, especially when we've been doing the recent community feedback, that sense of community is what's important to folks. And so finding different ways to build that, whether that's cul-de-sacs or other ways, I think we should be looking at kind of all of those as a way to kind of keep that sense of community going. I think that there are definitely ways to modernize and account for some of the, the drawbacks to cul-de-sacs. I think that pedestrian and bicycle access should be huge, and even required more often than in other neighborhoods. I think that there are ways like requiring extra fire hydrants and wider streets even in these types of places that I think would be really helpful. I think it's a way to kind of get some amenities that the community wants, the wider streets, the pedestrian access, but also from the articles apparently make it a little bit cheaper for the builder to do as well, because they're not building all the connection streets. And so it's a way to add amenities that folks are looking for without raising costs.
Are there other reasons that developers would gravitate to cul-de-sacs? Aside from topographical issues that kind of sometimes may force your hand.
Mhm.
But are there other reasons besides they don't have to build as many streets? Is there?
Yeah, it comes down to cost. It's cheaper to figure out a site layout and street design where you don't have to take into account existing and potential future connections. It's more cost effective to develop more curvilinear or streets that have dead ends than it is to do the work to figure out where the connections could possibly be.
It's more freehand drawing of
Mhm.
streets than forcing you got to go there and there.
Yeah. And then it also, it in the short term, it allows for more space for houses, right? If you're not having to connect a street through to connect to another street, then that's more land that you have to put houses on. In the long term and on a larger scale, we find that it's actually a really inefficient use of land, that it is more efficient to have a grid network with more connectivity.
Shelley, what do they say about public transit with cul-de-sacs? How is
Yeah,
that?
I mean, I didn't find anything specific about that, but I would imagine it's the same you run into the same problems with, you know, having fire truck turnaround. That if you have a bus, you need to have enough space for that bus to turn around. I'm trying to think back, like when I rode the school bus in, you know, middle and high school. I don't know. I think I don't think I was paying attention to,
Yeah.
you
I
know,
can tell you
turning
this,
around in cul-de-sacs.
that from a school bus driver's perspective,
Mhm.
it is much more efficient to have a cul-de-sac.
Mm.
Because on our street, at a time, 30 kids got on the bus at that one stop.
Mhm.
You could pull the bus up and fill it and go to school.
Yeah, you would just need to have the same kind of turnaround diameter considerations that you would have for.
Or the
emergency
kids walk
vehicles.
to
Yeah,
the main street
Yeah.
if it's not super long. That's what our kids did,
Mhm.
because there was no turnaround, so it
Mhm.
wasn't a true cul-de-sac.
Yeah, I guess I could see that with the school bus. I was thinking more about public transit
Yeah.
where they wouldn't know that there's gonna be people or not people.
Right.
In a cul-de-sac.
and then from like a route efficiency standpoint, especially when you're talking about cul-de-sac length, the formulas, the programs, the software that people who develop public transit routes use favor connectivity over having to drive down a long dead-end street and then turn around and come back the other way, because you're passing the same spot twice in a very short amount of time because you're turning around and coming back, as opposed to going through to a new road, a different road.
But one way that to fix some of those things is to have a code that doesn't make them long.
Like,
I've just never seen a cul-de-sac, that was long and straight and went forever kind of thing. So
They're not super common in Oregon.
Yeah, they're
They-
1,000 feet in Illinois. Right.
Really?
Yeah, the Midwest.
that land's all flat.
Yeah, Midwest,
You can see it
California.
at the other end.
Especially Southern California, you get these just really, really long blocks that psychologically feel kind of insurmountable if you're not in a car. And so having kind of that, breaking up blocks, whether making them shorter or including pedestrian access or bicycle access easements, really helps kind of soften that kind of perspective of what a street feels like, what the character of the street is.
What I would add to it is I've actually lived on all sorts of streets. So I've lived on a cul-de-sac in Sandy. I currently live on a dead end road. I've lived on through streets as a kid and as an adult. And I have to say that in all cases, I've had stuff stolen out of my car. So in all cases, at least in my experience, I've had theft, including both places in Sandy. I would say that having small children right now, it's very nice to live on a dead end street. But I would also say that without the fire access easement at the end of our street, which is on my property, a lot of people wouldn't have anywhere to go as pedestrians. There's dozens of people that use it a week on my property. And it's not even a pedestrian easement, it's just a fire access easement. There is no pedestrian easement, but I just allow people to use it. But so it's obvious from living there that without me allowing people to use that, there would be an insufficient pedestrian and bike network in our little subdivision. So it is interesting. I do agree as having small kids, it's pretty nice because you can let them play in the road easier. But like, at least my experience, I will say I've had, like I said, I haven't seen them act as being safer. In fact, on Sandy Heights, close to where I live, because it's so dark, we have to call in the police a lot for people drinking and driving and then getting stuck or hitting trees back there. I think they get lost. And because there's no light, I think they hit things. Like we've literally had like 3 drunk drivers in last year that we've called in. So I would say just because you're out in the rural area where it's a little darker and more dispersed, I wouldn't, from my perspective, it hasn't really seemed much safer, to be honest. Which I know is kind of weird and probably not what people would expect, but that has been my actual experience in Sandy.
Yeah, and like I mean, I grew up on a street with a cul-de-sac, and I have a distinct memory of learning how to ride a bike in the cul-de-sac. And we can talk about kind of like our personal anecdotes of, you know, living on cul-de-sacs or living on through streets. And we can also look at kind of big, high-level aggregate research. So one of the things, you know, that gets talked about a lot is safety. It's safer for kids. But when you look at what kinds of car-related injuries or fatalities that happen with children, kids are significantly less likely to get hit by a car driving down the street and significantly more likely to actually get backed into by somebody coming out of a driveway and not looking where they're going. So you have that problem in cul-de-sacs or on through streets. Yeah, so that kind of like opens up, you know, okay, well then what kinds of questions should we be asking about this? And where should we be finding the information to answer those questions? And even going kind of a step above that is what kinds of priorities, what kinds of values, what kinds of, you know, I keep coming back to this question, which is like very, it's interesting that having a conversation about clear and objective code requirements, what I think it comes back to is how do we want our city to feel, which is about as subjective as it gets. And so it's about trying to draw that line between, okay, thinking about how we want the community to feel, how we want the city to feel, how do we draw that line from that to clear and objective code requirements? And it's a big ask.
Mhm.
Yeah.
And you know, you might be able to feel or get a small area
Mhm.
to feel that way,
Mhm.
but it's not going to extrapolate citywide
Sure. Yeah.
because of that little thing. We've
Yeah.
already got, you know, street systems set up
Mhm.
that may be counterproductive to some of the feelings that we
Mhm.
want.
Mhm.
And we're never going to turn that boat around.
Oh yeah.
So
I just had two thoughts I would add. One was when my children were very little, we lived in Portland, and so it was a grid, but there were parks every so often. And actually what happened was all the moms, we all took our kids to the park, and that's where they played and we had a chance to visit. So they were playing and they weren't in the street.
Yeah.
So that was one thought I had. And the other thought I had was that, you know, I also grew up on a cul-de-sac, and we have now this new thing in the state where every one of those single family houses can have an additional dwelling on it. And so that era, that way of life is changing, whether we have cul-de-sacs or not, because there's going to be these apartments or smaller dwellings on our dwellings. I don't know what that looks like. It's just something to think about.
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up about parks, because that's, you know, an example of, okay, taking something we like about cul-de-sacs, which is something very local, very like just out your front door where kids can go play. What if we changed that to, okay, more parks, right? So that's an example of taking this thing that we like about cul-de-sacs and figuring out another approach to get that, you know? Which, I mean, then you start having conversations of like, okay, how much does that cost and where are they going to go? It's the world of planning. You're just constantly looking at all of the possible externalities and alternatives to every possible decision you could make about land. Yeah.
Well, I don't want to repeat everything everybody said, but I agree with what everybody said, because I too did not grow up on a cul-de-sac, but every house I've owned after that was a cul-de-sac. But a couple of notes that I wrote when looking at this, one was driveways. I think driveways design is very important in a cul-de-sac for the turning radius, which you mentioned. Parking, that wasn't mentioned. Where in Chicago, as soon as the two cars are in the driveway, all the friends are in the cul-de-sac. and it blocks the area and you can't even get around. It's a major congestion. So we have to make sure we set criteria around that because it will totally close that off. And then I too had a note about public transit access, because I don't expect the bus to go down the cul-de-sac, but I would want the people who live in the cul-de-sac to be able to walk to the bus stop. How do they get there? And then pedestrian and bicycle accommodations as well. Those were all my notes, and most of
Yeah.
you covered all
I
that.
have seen examples of some cul-de-sacs. I don't know if I've seen this in Oregon, but especially older streets that are much more narrow, that didn't need to accommodate like really big cars, that they've actually gone in and put no parking signs. So that way you can have a smaller diameter, which allows for emergency vehicle turnaround, but then the trade-off is you don't have that space for parking.
And we do live in Sandy where there's not going to be a bunch of foresters parked there. It's going to be the Dodge Rams
Yeah.
and the Chevy pickups, right? They're the
Yeah,
big trucks.
yeah.
And you know, I think about, you talked about how to ride a bike in the cul-de-sac. I taught two of my daughters how to drive in a cul-de-sac
Mhm.
around that circle because it was safe.
Yeah.
And we had a fire hydrant in the middle of that circle,
Mhm.
and then one on the corner too. So I don't know how long the hoses were.
Yeah.
But I thought they created great pocket communities. Of course, the home I'm speaking of was backed against a big retail development of
Yeah.
Walmart and Starbucks. So they didn't want you driving in their parking lot. So they created all these cul-de-sacs that went up to the line of it,
Mhm.
which was nice. And I'm thinking of 362nd and Bell, if you got all that, if you got commercial up there, then you could create cul-de-sacs on the backside of it, so people can just come in. But
Yeah.
it did create pocket communities, just like the dead end I live on right now, where I know all of my neighbors around me, and I've driven down his access once in my car.
Did you have to move toys out of the way to do it?
No, but just to had to swing the gate myself. But yeah, I love cul-de-sacs, but I don't love them when they impede connectivity
Yeah.
in a community. And
Right.
so I think what you mentioned about setting up, you know, the topographical direction is for me, the way to go. So
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, so that's the big question is figuring out, when do we want to allow them? When do we want to discourage them? And how do we create clear and objective code standards that create that kind of allow them when we want them and disallow them when we don't want them?
well, don't we have the way our arterial streets are what the future plan is for arterial streets in the transportation plan? So the cul-de-sacs would not be could not override what's in the TSP.
Yeah, there's a lot of street connectivity principles throughout the code that pretty much discourage cul-de-sac development. I think the three big ones, which Shelley pointed out, you know, are steep hillsides, wetlands, and if we don't want access to major arterials such as Highway 26 and Highway 211, those three examples would be the reasons. Since I've worked here for 12 years, those have been when we have allowed cul-de-sacs. I do think there's an argument to be made in potentially some cases that where residential abuts commercial or industrial. I think sometimes you want that connectivity with the street, but I do think there's probably some cases like if you had a Walmart or a Costco, I don't think you want a residential neighborhood
Sure, what the
getting
cuts
all
are.
that traffic getting dumped out into their neighborhood. I think that would be a really bad situation. Yeah.
Have you ever seen a cul-de-sac that might be like a butting against commercial, not a hill, where on the bulb end, there's actually space for an emergency vehicle to get in, say from the parking lot of Walmart or whatever, to be able to get into that street that's only used for that. Is anybody?
I've seen it.
Yeah, there are
That's
ways
like
to
your
do
drive.
that.
Right.
Enforcement can sometimes be an issue. As far as enforcing vehicle or emergency vehicle access only, as opposed to just somebody wanting to take a shortcut. But there are mechanisms to try to make something like that happen.
Yeah, you could use bollards, locking bollards
Mhm.
with a knockbox that the fire department can
Yep.
unlock.
I mean, that was just a thought of a way that would also give a bicycle
Yeah, yeah. and then you get the
bicycle
pedestrian
access
bicycle access.
around by just reserving a strip.
It's funny you mentioned that because I remember I loved my cul-de-sac thinking all that traffic stays out of my street. So I love it. But then every time I wanted to go to the store, I hated it because I had to go all the way around. to get
And you
to the-
saw it
go to
right
the
there.
store.
And then you also run into the issue of people who are not super familiar with the area, going down a dead end street thinking it's going to connect them to, you know, a commercial area or a parking lot they're trying to get to, and then realize it doesn't, turn around.
Commissioner Wagner, and I apologize if you've had your hand up for a while. I know I get guilty of my eyes going all around here and not paying attention to the monitor. So
Nope, I just had it up for a minute. I had a question on kind of maybe what are the similarities or what would the additional advantages or disadvantages of something like loop streets be instead of cul-de-sacs?
You still run into some of the same connectivity issues and land efficiency issues. You don't necessarily have the same issues regarding vehicle turnaround.
I think one of the
Yeah.
biggest issues with that is first responder response times. In my experience, I get a lot of comments from the fire district or the police that they want every street that runs north, south, and every street that runs east, west to be named differently. And I think with like a loop street, you get the issue of first responders that aren't as experienced with the community having trouble finding addresses. That's what I've been told, at least. Same kind of deal, like in Portland, you'll see it a lot where, you know, A street is 5 or 6 blocks long and then it doesn't exist for a mile. And then all of a sudden it pops up again on Google Maps. My in-laws live on one called Troy Street. And so it's really short. And then the next Troy Street's like half a mile away. So I don't know. It does make it very confusing from what I understand for first responders.
Yeah.
We do now. We now get direct input from the fire department prior to every address that we assign in the city limits. So we get input from the fire marshal to determine if it will cause any issues with first responders. And I think that's really been a good move to work with them more closely on that. Because there has been a few cases where they're like, yeah, actually, this would not work great for us for these reasons. And then we adjust accordingly.
As a previous dispatcher for fire and police in Portland, I can appreciate the road naming and that piece. I was just curious. I mean, obviously the connectivity would still be an issue, but especially like I live on what I would consider Loop Street, even though it is different names as you turn each different 90-degree angle, you know, and so I was wondering, you know, some of that could be alleviated and we could solve some of these issues while still keeping some of the community kind of pieces there. I definitely know that, you know, as we look at this, one of the things that at least I've seen so far in Sadie is that there's a lot of smaller, just little pocket developments. And the last thing I would want to see too is just these small little 5, 10 house cul-de-sacs off of this main road. And so you have nothing but this, you know, little, you know, cul-de-sacs off these main roads, arterial roads, and you don't actually get a full neighborhood feel of it as well. Because I think that even though you have the cul-de-sacs, I think the overall neighborhood feel is kind of important as well. So as we kind of think about that, I think that's important. But thank you for the loop.
That's a really good point.
Shelley, one other thing that I think should be taken into consideration, I know there's going to be a meeting coming up here soon about dealing with environmental hazards and things. But, you know, fires are a thing now. And I would be interested, and I think it would be really important to look at how can people get out quickly if they need to on a grid versus cul-de-sac. So
with connectivity, when there's more opportunity to use local streets instead of everybody having to be directed to collector or arterial streets, then people would be able to evacuate quicker. I'm of the opinion that as a city, we should be prioritizing that more. That idea of if there is a citywide evacuation, we have 26 and we have 211, and that's going to create some problems. Yeah, but I think that's a really good point. Yeah,
I would agree. With my work on the state wildfire task force that I've been doing for over the last year now, that's a really good point. That I do agree with you that they're going to probably move in the direction of having more connectivity wherever possible from the state legislature's perspective. And that is a very important consideration.
Yeah, I know Sandy's been kissed with the fires a little bit. I live just outside of town and we've had to evacuate 3 times in the last 4 years.
Yeah.
And one time it was really quickly. So it feels very real to me.
Yeah.
The threat of fire
Yeah.
is very real.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, that's a big issue that needs to be considered, not just in street design, but a lot of other topics about how we plan the city. Yeah.
Commissioner Lee?
I think one of the worst examples I've seen of cul-de-sacs and loop roads and everything else is Sun River. If anyone has ever traveled Sun River, especially at night, you'll know what I'm talking about.
There are some people that are still driving around. Sun River.
I grew up in La Pine, so I grew up, and my dad built in Sun River for 20-some years, and I worked for him. And I second Commissioner Lee on that 100%. It was the worst thing, like trying to find your way around in there. And that was before you could use your phone, you know.
Yeah. Good point.
Yeah, Portland is a really interesting example of street connectivity because there are parts of Portland that do it really, really well, right? You have these small blocks and like just very gridded. And then you have these other areas like Ladd's Addition where everything's on a diagonal, where it's like, I don't know where I am. It's kind of like the Bermuda Triangle. And then shortly after I moved out here, I was in Portland and I was downtown and I took a wrong turn and ended up in the hills, which is very curvilinear. And it was nighttime. And at that time I was driving a very old beat up car. And I was like, I obviously don't know where I'm going. These people are going to call the police because they're multi-million-dollar houses and I'm driving a 2005 Honda Civic. They're going to wonder who I am. So yeah, Portland has a lot of really interesting examples of the experiences with street connectivity. Yeah.
Well, what more do you need from us? Would you like from us this evening?
Yeah, so if you want to kind of take this conversation and chew on it a little bit and get back to us with recommendations or things that we should consider, I think that would be the most helpful in helping us understand what the priorities are as we work on developing a clear and objective set of code requirements for cul-de-sacs.
And I think the additional considerations we've heard are all very important. I'm really thinking about Commissioner McLean-Wenzel's comments about fire evacuation route planning, Maine's comment about parking and public transit access, and then even I think Commissioner Lee's last comment about something to avoid like Sun River. I think that's just something very good to keep in the back of everybody's mind. Is like, you don't want to make it. I think there's a time and place to use cul-de-sacs, and I think we all agree that sometimes they're very beneficial, especially for kids and stuff. But I do think, like Commissioner Lee pointed out, there are some examples that we think of that could be like become a nightmare situation too. And I think Commissioner Wegener's point of, which I hadn't really thought of until he stated that, but that yes, cul-de-sacs can give like a little community. But then what it does potentially, and I've never thought of this before, just so that is if there's a slightly larger community that could be incorporated into that, it could close those people off. So I thought his point there was very interesting. Some I hadn't really ever considered, that it can kind of limit neighborhood association with one another too.
I also found, this was not included with the packet. I found it about at about 6:15 this evening. This kind of policy brief from the Washington State Department of Transportation on transportation efficient communities. The title of the brief is How Can Cities and Counties Plan for Straight Network Connectivity? And I really like it because it goes into really actionable policy recommendations. As much as I love having kind of like the big picture abstract conversations of what does this mean? What does this feel like? What do we want for the future? We do ultimately need to kind of boil that down to, you know, code requirements. So I'll email this to
Yeah,
everybody on
thank
Planning
you.
Commission. You can take a look at it and see, you know, obviously this is a Washington context, but what some of those kind of policy, kind of on the ground recommendations are for street connectivity for local jurisdictions.
And then I think we were trying to probably bring this back to the commission in late winter, or early spring, with the anticipation of potentially adopting it with the clear and objective audit changes. So I think if you have thoughts, I think if you could send them to Shelley in the next month or 6 weeks,
Yeah.
sometime in that time
I'll
period.
follow up in 3 weeks.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Okay.
Great.
Well, thank you. It was a fun discussion. Are we okay to move ahead? Do you want a quick break? What?
Go with that.
Okay. We will move into the next, let me get our one item of new business this evening.
Self-service, right? Self-service storage.
Yep, and this is a legislative order hearing, which I will open at 7:42. And this is plan or public hearing number 2022-43, design code amendment, self-service storage code modifications. Any abstentions from anybody on the planning commission? Okay, nothing seen, or any conflicts of interest to declare? Okay. And since we're in a legislative one, we quickly go to the staff report.
All right, I'm going to share my screen.
Seen her for a while.
All right, oops. So we're looking at making some code modifications related to self-service storage. And just for a little background, the Economic Development Advisory Board met back in March of this year and talked about restricting self-service storage. The three main reasons that they were interested in doing this is that self-service storage typically does not create living wage jobs, typically does not create many jobs at all, and the ones that it does create are usually not living wage. It's also very land intensive, and then the facilities, when they're built, can't really easily be redeveloped into something else if they fail. So those are kind of the three main reasons that the Economic Development Advisory Board was interested in limiting self-service storage. And so they discussed a few different options. One would be just an outright ban. And they did look at other cities as examples to see what other cities have done. Another would be eliminating self-service storage in specific zones. So for example, eliminating it as an allowed use in commercial zones, setting a limit on total square footage, or requiring self-service storage development to be mixed use. So the code amendments that you have before you tonight affect 6 chapters. So non-conforming development, definitions, central business district, general commercial industrial park, and general industrial. And the main goal of the amendments is to remove self-service storage as an allowed use from the central business district and general commercial zoning districts, and then to restrict it to a conditional use in the industrial park zoning district, which I'll go into further in the next slides. And the main idea behind both of these is to preserve land for uses with larger employment growth. So this is really about creating uses with more jobs. So within the conditional use within the I-1 for self-service storage, in addition to the requirements that are already in the code, design standards in 1790-120, the code amendments propose that the self-service storage in the I-1 would be permitted only with multi-story structures, so no single story storage facilities. That exterior access to individual units would not be permitted if visible from a public right-of-way. That each floor above the ground floor that's facing a street would have a minimum of 15% glass, and that at least 75% of any first story building walls that face a collector or arterial would have interest creating features. The pedestrian entrances, reliefs, murals, landscaping, transparent show or display windows, or windows that have views into retail, office, or lobby space. So that's really the gist of it. Most of the code sections in the C1 and C2 is really just striking it as a use, and then the I1 gets into a little bit more detail in the conditional use section. And so our recommendation is just to review the proposed code amendments and then make a recommendation to City Council. And that concludes the staff report.
Thanks, Emily. I was going to ask actually our city attorney if anybody had any questions about the measure 56 notice requirements and the reasons we do that for potential claims. I didn't know, Josh, if you wanted to kind of explain that a little bit more detail about kind of the procedure and why we have to make that notice to all the different zones that may be impacted by the removal of this use.
Yeah, I'm happy to answer any questions. I think you covered the basics. Measure 56 requires that cities and other local governments send out notice to property owners when a property is proposed to be rezoned, and rezone includes disallowing uses that were previously allowed in a zone. So that's why we had to send the notice out in the case of this ordinance.
Okay.
And if there's any more questions on that, if anybody testifies, we can rely on the city attorney to help us answer those questions.
Mhm.
Thank you, Josh.
Yep.
Okay, we will move ahead to public testimony. And are there others in the room?
There are 2 attendees still.
Okay,
Correct.
so with just a couple, we will just give opportunity for testimony either in favor or against the proposal, or neutral, or suggestions. And again, if you are on the Zoom call, just click that raised hand icon. It will, and then wait to be recognized. If you're on the telephone, it's *9 to, and then wait to be recognized. So we'll just open it now for anybody, public testimony on this proposal. Raise your hand.
Oh, you do have one person. Last name Nenninger. So I'm going to promote them to be able to talk. And your name and address for the record so we can mail you stuff later on, please.
Hi, yes, my name is Era Nenninger, and I am with Spartan Investment Group, and we are the developer and operator of a recently opened storage facility in Sandy. And I just wanted to comment that while I completely understand the position that there are fewer living wage jobs provided by this building type as other retail and commercial enterprises, we are paying what I verified to be a living wage in the Sandy community to our facility manager. And we're certainly under the, we're at 60,000 square feet, so we don't have the issue, I think, of an expanded footprint. But I fully understand that the integration of retail might be more desirable than a standalone self-storage facility. I did just want to make the comment that we're definitely seeing self-storage viewed in a retail lens, as it's an amenity that many people want in their community close by and not relegated to industrial areas only. As many single family and multifamily units are getting smaller in terms of storage, I think people want the accessibility for self-storage as an amenity that can be provided close to their homes. And we're seeing that the desired distance is within a 5-mile radius of their homes, which is why I would just maybe petition for consideration of that when addressing your rezoning. Thank you so much for hearing me.
Thank you. Anybody else?
I do not see anybody else.
Okay. Well, we'll move on to staff recap and recommendation. If you have further
Yeah,
comments.
I was going to ask Emily, can you explain the non-conforming use section changes that we're making and the allowances that would allow for somebody like Spartan Investment Group, I believe?
Yeah, so I was going to bring that up. So first of all, we're not outright banning self-service storage from the city. It's still allowed in I-2 and then as a conditional use in I-1. And the ones that already exist, which I believe there are 3. And then there's another that has an active land application that's not complete at this point, but so we don't know if it'll get approved or not or move forward. But that would be a 4th. Those would then become non-conforming uses. And so we did update that chapter as well to account for existing, what would then become existing non-conforming uses. And those would be, they'd be allowed to rebuild. If they expanded, it would trigger having to come into conformance with the code. I'd have to look specifically at the exact changes. We had a review by our city attorney, but that's kind of the gist of it.
I thought there was something in there about allowing for a potential expansion even up to 20% or something like that.
I think so. Let me look. Got it up.
Yeah, I'm seeing it.
So even in the case of some of the storage units, they might be able to even expand some more under these proposed code modifications.
Yeah, it's limited to a footprint of 20%, an increase in building footprint of 20%.
Right.
And yeah, and that's, I guess, something I would like to elaborate on too. I think when the Economic Development Committee talked about this, my understanding, I wasn't at the meeting, but I've talked to the staff members that were, my understanding was the concern that Ms. Nettinger brought up is that we asked them, do you want, some communities have outright permitted them in the entire city. Some have done nothing, and then some have chose select zones like we're doing here, eliminate them from those zones, still allow them through a non-conformity, and then have other zones that could still be constructed in. And that's what the Economic Development Committee landed on. And I think the main reason was what Ms. Nettinger brought up, is that we don't want to be so restrictive that you'd have to travel to Gresham or to Happy Valley for your storage needs. However, they do have some concerns based on some pre-apps that we've gotten over the last few years about large amounts of land on 362nd and Bell Street being devoted to storage units. I don't believe, I can't speak for the council, but I don't believe that's kind of their vision for that area, is to have a bunch of 3- and 4-story storage units sprawled out everywhere. We got one inquiry, I believe, from, I'm blanking on who it was, U-Haul. That's who it was, U-Haul. And they were going to build I think a 240,000 square foot facility 2 stories tall. So that's 60,000 square feet larger than the Fred Meyer that's in town. So when we start getting inquiries like that, I think the Spartan Investment Group did a phenomenal job. That one, it looks very well done. It's in a location that was going to be difficult to have another type of use there that was going to be highly used. So I think in that particular instance, I think that's a good use of that land. But the inquiries we were getting, like from U-Haul and a few others, we believe that the use of that land would be much better suited for something that would bring a lot more jobs. So I do get her point. I think it's valid. And I think that's why the Economic Development Committee didn't want to exclude them from all zones. Because she is right, housing, this amount of storage space at a lot of housing is getting tighter. So it's a good point.
Mhm. Okay. Well, with no other further public, let's go ahead and close the public hearing. And we don't have a.
I move that we close the public hearing.
Second it.
It's been moved and seconded to close the public hearing at 7:56. All in favor, say aye.
Aye.
Aye, or give us a
Aye.
thumbs up. All right. Discussion.
I just had a question for staff, only because we were just talking about clear and objective and qualitative results. Self-storage is highly articulated with stats. How many per population, how many square feet per person? Do we have any idea what Sandy looks like?
I have no idea. I don't even know where you would find that information.
Yeah. I mean, I'm sure there's somebody out there that's done a market study. Well, I know we hired somebody to do a market study. I think it was Johnson Economics or somebody like that several years back. I don't remember that as being one of the uses that they were calling out that we specifically needed more of. With Spartan Investment Groups, you know, the free up storage being installed, they must have determined that there was a need. And I'm guessing that there's some need because of the other inquiries we're getting.
And just based on density that we have.
Mhm.
And
But no, I don't know the stats though.
so as a guy who's used self-storage for 10 years, I mean, I haven't in 10 years, but I did for 10 years. That first caller nailed it. I don't want to drive. I want it to be close. I want it to be secure. I don't need it on the corner of Main and Main. It can be in the back. So I would hate to see us get rid of self-storage opportunities, but I'm an advocate for what staff is suggesting on eliminating from C1 and C2, but allowing it to be with restriction put in the I zone. And I would support that.
Commissioner Lee.
Yes, I thought the staff proposal was well thought out, and as I've noticed new storage facilities like the ones over in Happy Valley, those are multi-story and have a whole different feel. Being on the city council when Bell Street was talked about and promoted, I would also, as was stated before, I would hate to see the Bell Street complex just be a network of self-storage facilities. So I would certainly support the staff report and what has come out in the way of changes proposed to the code.
I kind of chuckled when I read the minutes from our last meeting that one of the questions I raised on that particular set of code was, what is public view? And I was reading this and I can't find it because it's too long to scroll and find it here. But my question is, if you have, two long storage things, like a bunch of garages facing each other, and the street's out here, and I walk by, and at a particular angle, I can see all those garage doors. Is that visibility from public view? I'm not sure how the way they tend to be built, you know, I'm not looking right at the front of it, but as I walk by, I'm thinking of the ones that are by the medical center across from Bimart. Of course, they were
Yeah.
pre-code, but I believe you can walk along the sidewalk there in certain spots and be able to see the doors. But, you know, what do we mean by visible from public view?
I know visible from public view was something that the clear and objective audit consultants working on a definition, a clearer definition.
A clear and objective definition.
We did raise that one after you raised that, I believe. And so they have it in their notes that I've seen that. That's one they need to define better.
I'm not saying that it'd be a bad thing to have them constructed that way. I'm just saying that it's possible to be able to do them.
I would just say that I would agree with Commissioner Mayton and Commissioner Lee. I thought that the staff did a really good job.
I would say the same, and I'm supportive of the idea to control them.
Yes.
I don't want to say limit them, but to really control them for our best interests. I think it does it. Emily, do you have any questions for us or other input that you would like before we move it on down the road?
No, I mean, unless you have any edits, I think that was a good point about the visibility. I believe that section came from Vancouver's code maybe, so I can take a look at it again and see if they elaborate, but I think the intent was to just, you know, like you all see in the new ones in Happy Valley or along Powell or Division driving in towards Portland, there's like glass and then the doors are behind that, I think, as opposed to just the cars driving up on the front side at least. So I think it's trying to limit the cars driving up to like kind of the backside out of public view. But if you have any comments like that, we can kind of take a look, but otherwise we're just looking for a recommendation.
So what would be your official comment on that, Chairman? I just want to get it right for the minutes.
Oh, it'd be just what is visible from public view. And I'd have to find exactly where it was that
I just want to make sure we capture.
clicked that.
So you're saying we should just make sure we clarify that?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yep.
Yeah. We
That's
can
what I
look
think
at
that would probably be caught in your clear and objective
Probably.
analysis of it.
I mean, I think the good thing is if we clarify that, and then the clear and objective is codified prior to or around the time that the moratorium is lifted, we won't have any applications that, although this is actually
Gotta
a
add
commercial.
sewer.
It doesn't even have to be clear and objective actually, because it's not a residential land use application
Oh, yeah.
by law. However, in saying that, I still think we should try to make it as clear and objective as possible,
Mhm.
because that's helpful for staff and it's also helpful for developers to know predictability
Mhm.
about what we mean. So I agree with you. We should make it clear and objective. From doing this job long enough now, if the more confusing the code is for both parties, the more then we get into debates with each other and it just consumes everybody's time.
Chair, it does say exterior access to individual units is not permitted if visible from a public right of way. That's what they wrote.
Where's that at?
It's page 49. It's number conditional use B and then sub bullet 4B. It's either 49 or 50 in there. It's in the blue.
Following design standards. Okay, my mouse going here.
Yeah, so I guess it's the top of page 3 of 4. They got it written in there. Exterior access to individual units is not permitted if visible
Okay,
from a public right of way.
That's talking about the exterior access.
Which
So
is
that would be
garage,
the door.
the doors,
Right.
right?
So the door can't be visible from
Public
public
right.
right of way.
That's what that
That's
says.
the way it says. Okay. And that's what.
The individual units,
Pardon?
For indi-
the doors to individual units,
Correct.
Yeah.
so that they would have like, the main door could be visible, obviously. But the other thing to keep in mind is that this would all be a conditional use as well in that zone. So a lot of this would be reviewed through that process as well.
Yeah, so yeah, we'll take another look at that. But like I said, it doesn't have to be clear and objective, but we're striving to make it as clear and objective as possible, even for non-residential requirements.
Well, it would be possible to screen for that, wouldn't it? I mean,
Yeah, for sure.
well, I mean, it
Could be
doesn't
a
seem like
simple-
it's not a burden. It's just something that needs to be attended to.
Mhm. And it may only apply to, 1% of the possible configurations on a given site that you could build it such that it would have to be built that way. All right, well, I don't see any other hands. So our task is to make a motion, and it sounds like we'll be making a motion to pass it on to city council for their consideration with our comments.
Chair, I'll move that we forward a recommendation of approval to city council.
And I'll second it.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded to forward file 2022-043 on to city council with our comments that are in the record. Let's take a roll call.
Okay. Commissioner Wagner,
Aye.
Commissioner Pullen,
I agree.
Commissioner McLean Wenzel,
Yes,
Commissioner Lee,
Yes,
Commissioner Mayton,
Yes,
and Chair Crosby.
Yes, motion carries.
And before we adjourn, if we can get an answer from the city attorney on the next meeting and what constitutes a quorum.
When I said 4, it's 5 actually, because I forgot about Commissioner Hook. So you have 5 people. Right?
Right.
Five.
Potential.
Potential 5. So
5.
it's- a quorum would still be 3, right? At least that's what my thinking is.
So the quorum would be 4.
4.
There's a part of the code that says specifically that a quorum of the planning commission is 4. And then there's also the general rule that vacancies aren't taken into consideration for determining that unless you have an exception in your code, and the code does not have an exception. So 4 is the number.
nobody can get sick.
Um,
Yeah.
Do you
So-
want to
so-
do send a note to Commissioner Hook?
So it sounds like we have 3. If we can get Commissioner Hook there, then we'll have 4. Yeah, I can send him one tomorrow and see before we send the notice. Is that fine?
That's good.
Yeah.
What is the process now to fill the 2 vacancies?
So the process will be that we post it on our website and on Facebook, and we have the open application period. People will apply. The council will have to then create like a scoring committee or an interview committee like they have done in the past. Usually that's like 3 counselors plus a commissioner. And then they'll interview the applicants and then they'll choose 2 for recommendation. Then it goes to the city council for vote.
That's if you get enough applicants.
Yes. That's if we get enough applicants. I do think there's at least people that I know of that are interested right now.
Yeah.
So I believe we'll have enough, but we'll see once we open it up.
I just wanted to request, they allowed me to join and made a space for someone just outside of the city limits to be on, for one position to be able to be somebody just outside the city limits. And I hope that you guys will continue to make that possible, because I think as the city is growing, those of us who live just outside the city but still have a Sandy address, it's good to have that voice.
But you're on because you're a business owner, aren't you? Didn't she?
I don't remember exactly what it was. We own property in town and we have a business in town, but our residence is outside of town. So I don't know what exactly it was required, but I would hope that whatever it was that the city council decided, that just to keep an eye to, or an open
Yeah.
heart to.
It's in your bylaws currently in Title II,
Right.
so we can still fill,
Mhm.
say, another position with a like role.
Yeah.
Yeah, which I think is a good idea as well.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Okay, if there's nothing further, we will be adjourned.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks, Josh. Thanks,
Thank you.
everyone.
Good night.
You too.
Bye, everyone.
I was thinking earlier tonight that